We are here for a purpose. And I hope in this brief time that I have to speak to you, that I can convince you that this is the most important purpose in the world. That purpose is called conservation, a term that has often been used lightly, that has often been tossed around as sometimes a notion of convenience, but which in its truest form, in its deepest and greatest expression, is something that I believe, as much as anything else, underscores the greatness of this nation, of the United States of America, and indeed of all nations that wish to believe that part of their absolute responsibility as citizens of the world is to conserve the natural world. There is not a thing that we have of value, not our capacities as human beings, not our families, not our freedoms, not our institutions. There is nothing that we can value as human beings that ultimately is not dependent upon a world that is sustaining for us. What we desperately need is leadership. We desperately require, across this one tiny spinning globe, the only home we have, we desperately require leadership to understand that it is not a trade-off. It is not a trade-off between economic development and the conservation of the natural world. And that the two must find a way to coexist. Our lives, the lives of our countries, the progress of our civilizations are all dependent on this. And there is absolutely no way to rewrite that equation to make it better for some particular segment of society. The great American mythologist Joseph Campbell was asked one time in a famous interview to sum up what he knew about the world. This was one of the greatest thinkers that your country, which has thrown up so many magnificent thinkers, had to say. He said, "Flesh eats flesh." This is the ultimate inalienable truth, not just of ecology, ladies and gentlemen, but of our lives, the lives of our children, the lives of our grandchildren, and the lives of all the generations before us and all generations yet unborn. It has become, in my view, rather commonplace for this idea of conservation to be put forward almost as a profession or as an occupation. We have to start thinking about this business that we are in, this passion that we feel, this effort that we make as a movement, a social movement. It is not just something that biologists do or a hunter does, no, it is something that is a movement that will make society a decent place in which to live, a place of progress, a place of opportunity, or an alternative that is not something we wish to contemplate nor something we wish to abide by. Conservation is not some sideshow. It is not something convenient for a politician here or there to say they are in favor of. It is not an easy task. It is not way down on the list of important responsibilities that we hold to our countries, that we owe to them. Because our countries, our nations make us what we are. And there is nothing more important, as Theodore Roosevelt told us so long ago, than to conserve these precious resources and the traditions that live by them. You can only take so much from a country. You can only take so much tradition from a culture. You can only weaken it so much before it becomes something too fragile to exist in the face of challenge. I know that in our movement today, and I know in this organization, tied so fundamentally as it is with the world of agriculture and big agriculture today, tied so closely in that regard to the iconic image of America, the Jeffersonian image of the family with a farm, self-reliant and resilient. I know that we battle colossi now, the mega agriculture, the mega industries of energy. I know that. And I know that at times it seems that we cannot possibly overcome those challenges, that issues of drought and economic deterioration, the seeking of internal resilience, that we cannot battle these great forces. But I'm here to remind you of the challenges that this country has faced in the past, of the extraordinary achievements that this nation has managed over a 500-year history. Independence, survival in the beginning, independence, the feat of the greatest military power the world had ever seen, the greatest navy, the greatest military, the greatest army, the extraordinary, divisive, almost unbelievable bloodbath of the Civil War. 25,000 young men fell at Antietam. 25,000. North and South, brother and son, father and son, brother against brother. And yet this nation arose out of that, did it not? Extraordinary address at Gettysburg identified that this nation, alone amongst nations in the world, could put that behind them. Do you know that you are the only nation to have put something like that behind you? The circumstances of resource depletion that Roosevelt faced, stock market collapses, dust bowls, 2 world wars, Vietnam, the current financial crisis. Name me a challenge that this nation has not risen to and overcome. But every nation, every single nation, is driven forward by a small percentage of people. It has always been so. It will always be so. There will never be this enormous majority who equally lift a nation to greatness. We must remember that we have only one past, but we have many potential futures. And that is what we must commit ourselves to. Which of those futures do we want? I've had conversations with lots of people who tell me that they don't know if there was ever a more difficult time for conservation. Perhaps this is true. But I think back to the time when a handful of individuals really decided that the commercial wastage and exploitation of natural resources in the United States of America and Canada would cease. That we would instead bring in a system of conservation, a system of wise use of resources. Do we think it was easy for them? Do we think it was easy to close down the commercial operations of hunting and exploitation when a pound of egret feathers was worth more than a pound of gold? Was it easier at that time without the universities teaching our programs, without laws and institutions for conservation yet established? Was it easier for those individuals to say, no, this is enough? Not just because these creatures are magnificent, not just because they inspire us, and not just because they made us human. And they did. But because it is in the interest of our country. Oh yes, they also believed that economic development and progress was in the interest of their country. But they stood for something in addition. And that was for landscapes that would always harbor wildlife, for opportunities for every citizen to engage in activities like hunting and fishing that had been founding traditions in this nation. They fought so that the generations of us now would have the opportunities to worry about the challenges we face. We are blessed to be worried about these challenges, because without those leaders of the past, we would have nothing to be challenged over. This is not my story, ladies and gentlemen. This is yours. Perhaps even we in the conservation movement, at least I think so sometimes, are even becoming a bit too comfortable with our own economic arguments for conservation. That is the reason we should be conservationists, is because of the economic realities. I agree. But perhaps sometimes in doing so, in making these arguments, we move a little too far from the idealism of Roosevelt, from the idealism of George Bird Grinnell, from the idealism of those people who gathered first in a living room in New York City and said, you know what? We'll change it all. We'll fight the colossi. We'll do away with all those famous connections that were controlling the economies of this country. And we will usher in an age where the natural resources of this nation are conserved for all Americans. And let me tell you, it took more. It took more than logic. It took idealism, just like it took idealism to walk across that field in Gettysburg, no matter which side you were on. And just like it took idealism to believe that a brand new little country in a recently discovered part of the world would become the most influential nation the world has ever seen. This was not, ladies and gentlemen, built on logic alone. So when people call me an idealist, I stand a little taller. Is that not what we wish to give our children? A sense of ideals, a commitment to ideals, knowing full well that the lasting strength of our countries is based on these. I believe we need, and I say we, because we are those to whom it falls. I know everyone in this room, I know every single person in this room has done more for the conservation of wildlife than most people. Perhaps it is true to say that every person in this room has even done more for the conservation of wildlife than even others who are members of this great organization. But you are condemned. You are condemned to give more. You are part of what I call the core of relentless citizens, those individuals who will always give because you believe and because you are committed to your beliefs. We have three major challenges facing conservation today, ladies and gentlemen. In my view, while I can speak of many problems, I think there are three categorical challenges. One is that too few people care. Far too few people care. And the second is that those who do care are divided in how they approach this issue. They forget what Roosevelt said. He said they, wildlife, cannot speak for themselves. So we must, and we will. It's not about an organization. It's about those wild places. It's about having landscapes that will produce those wild creatures, of rivers that run clean, of mountains that harbor the great sheep and goats, of alpine meadows where the elk can bugle. Of that beautiful mix between the agriculturalist and the hunter's opportunity, where birds rise to the sun. How much is that worth? And if you had to give one thing to your children, if you had to give one thing to your grandchildren, would it be those things? Or would it be some material thing? If you could only choose one. Look at their faces. Look at their faces when they see the dogs. Look at their faces when they see a frog in a jar or on a lily pad or anywhere. The price of those moments is priceless. That's what we work for. The third greatest challenge is the economic model supporting conservation in this, the most important conservation nation in the world, is faltering. It has become our job, it has fallen to us to create this new sense of urgency. Not by just speaking to ourselves, but by speaking to all citizens of this country and every country about the value of these resources and of the critical need to protect them. We need to produce a modern narrative, not to believe that if we keep doing the things we've always done, that somehow we will safeguard conservation and wildlife into the future. It is a changing world. It demands that we adapt and change with it. We have to find a way to reach modern America. We have to find a way to reach modern Canada. We have to find a way to reach modern Europe. There is no alternative. And the hunter conservationists, yes, we must stand proud for all we have done and for all that we fight for and for all that we know is right. But we cannot stand alone. It falls to us now in the hunter conservation movement to reach out, to expand this conservation effort, to forge a conservation necklace of all people, of all organizations that will fight for those basic things that matter. We allow petty issues to divide us, while the greatest of issues run through our fingers. This is not what builds greatness. It is not what leadership is about. And it is not what moves civilization forward. I don't know most of you. I may never know most of you. But the world in which I live, the world in which my mind works, and the history that I'm aware of, leaves me no alternative but to admire you. You may think this is talk from a podium, but if you do, you're dead wrong. I know what it takes to keep wildlife with us. I have spent my entire life fighting for it, and I will fight for it until the day that I die. Not because I am some martyr, it's simply because, like you, I am condemned to this. I love wild creatures. I love wild places. They give me something that nothing else can give me, and hopefully they make me something that otherwise I could never have become. I am a firm believer that the hunting traditions of mankind have given us art, they have given us language, they have given us technology, they have given us the capacity to share, and in short, they have given us our humanness. I believe that in fighting in a modern world to convince society of the relevance of hunting is a sacred responsibility. I believe that conservation did in fact rescue wildlife from oblivion. And had people like you not sat in a room 120 years ago, you may take it for almost a certainty that mule deer and elk and pronghorn and wild turkey and Canada geese and wood ducks and grizzly bears and white-tailed deer, to name but a few, would no longer exist except as a plaintive reminder of what they once were, as does now the American buffalo. If we had had an Endangered Species Act in 1910, every single one of those species I have just mentioned to you would have been on it, and hunting of them would have been prohibited. So we may be thankful that the leaders who conceived their way out of that impossible circumstance saw hunting as the way forward. In the end, nations will understand that it is those individuals who have achieved and who really fought for what they believed in, and thereby advanced the cause, who cannot let go of what they strive for what they believe is right, and the organizations that have recognized them, that both of those have brought us a world that is fuller, better, more civilized, and more worth living in than any other group in society. When I look at those dogs and the images of people afield with them, in those great grass meadows, along those hedgerows, with that light bathing that landscape, I ask myself, is there a single thing missing? And my answer is that no, there isn't. Let us commit ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, please, to bringing this story to every corner of this nation. And don't let anybody tell you that we can't do it. All we need is the American will and idealism. And I thank you for yours. Thank you very much. God bless you.